Hi everyone. Today I'd like to talk about thoughts. Is it possible to choose to think? In my opinion, most thoughts are clearly generated by the mind. Here's a couple evidence of that. So first of all, here's the first classic example that is an evidence that we are not choosing to think about what we think of. It is to ask someone to not think about something. Example, don't think about an elephant. And you automatically think about an elephant. Which is pretty convincing. It's something that can at least convince you that a percentage, a much bigger percentage than you thought, is controlled by your mind and not you. Second evidence is think about when you feel that when you're trying to remember something and you feel like you're searching internally in your brain to find this word. And let's say that it took you around 15 minutes to find it. Now ask yourself this question, why 15? Why not before? Why not after? Sometimes it's going to take a much longer. Sometimes you're not even going to find it. It sounds very absurd to me that you are actively searching in your brain to find a word. It is clearly an illusion. So that's another very good evidence that you were not choosing to think about that. That it was just that what you found, okay, what you wanted, the word that you were seeking just occurred to you. So the next evidence, which is not common whatsoever, one of the best arguments against the idea that we generally choose to think about what we think of. But it requires a little bit more knowledge about other things that I've talked about in other videos related to beliefs, desires, emotions, and your incapacity of choosing them. So if you haven't seen those videos, I highly recommend you to go watch them. So it's the idea that when you experience a certain thought or an image internally, and you automatically feel something related to this thought or image, for example, let's say fear. Let's say that you see something or you experience a thought that leads to the emotion of fear. And we have shown that you cannot choose your emotions. It could also be something else. So it is very reasonable to say that for the mind to be able to generate this emotion, it has to understand the meaning of what was generated, like the sentence that was generated or the image. It has to understand it to be able to generate something associated with it, in this case, an emotion. So it makes perfect sense to say that it's also the mind that is generating the thought and then understands what it generates to be able to generate the rest. So think about that. This is extremely convincing. And obviously there's a lot of implications related to that. And I'll talk about that much deeper in future videos. But I still want to give you a couple examples of some implications. Example, all the ideas in the world, every ideas that we have, things that, the thoughts that we use to create our work. Well, all of those things are generated by our mind. And we wouldn't be able to accomplish any of those things without our minds. It will be simply impossible. So think about all the works in history when you have those thoughts that can allow you to write your books or your scripts for movies or anything that you're doing in your work. You simply are not responsible of the primary thing that allows you to do your work. That's just not possible. Okay, so it changes a lot of things here. And besides that, I also want to talk about grammatical mistakes. Okay, so this is something that can lead to guilt and shame. It can feel embarrassing and make it harder to write, for example. But those things, okay, those mistakes, those grammatical mistakes are generated by your mind. Okay, so believing that it's your mind that is responsible for that can actually help you to accept those mistakes, and it can even speed up the process. You can start to accept that, and it can help you to extract your thoughts much faster. And this is pretty much what I've experienced. And this is very pleasant because it can also help you to be more productive. Of course, in my case, I have a lot of health issues. So I still have a lot of problems with productivity. But it's something that is very appreciated. So besides that, of course, there's something that is, another thing that is unfortunate. Obviously, this is that some people are going to kill themselves because of suicidal thoughts. And unfortunately, because they believe that they choose to think about those suicidal thoughts and they choose to want to kill themselves, which is impossible. Well, understanding that it's your mind that generates those things can make the difference between killing yourself or not. So hopefully, and I'll talk about that in a video soon. But hopefully people are going to realize that pretty soon, and it's going to help to reduce suicide in the world. So obviously there's a lot more examples that I could give that are very important. Example like bullying and stuff. Everything that you see online that is posted on social media, for example. All of those things that people, those terrible things that people say to you that can hurt you, they were generated by their minds first. Okay. And this is extremely important to understand that, to be able to accept what you see. It's going to be much easier to accept because sometimes it's very hard to accept what you're going to see people saying or writing about you. And it's going to make it much easier. So like I said, while I said that it's impossible to just think, in a certain way, it's not completely true. It remains possible to influence what you see internally. And here's the argument that reasonably show that. It's the idea that you could hear the same thing, a word or a phrase, internally for a lot of time, okay, in a row, even all day long, which is obviously not a coincidence. The brain wouldn't be capable of generating all of that for that long. Okay, it makes no sense, which means that it has to be possible to have at least a small percentage of control over what we see internally. In my opinion, it's very small. It may be mostly related to repetition. maybe a little bit with reading, but it could be only small, and it's far from certain. So to me, it is nothing like, I just think that it's clearly impossible to choose to think about a new idea, for example. So it doesn't change much. So it's definitely recommended. And I think that this worldview is much more interesting because it can help us to try to find the things that are going to raise probabilities to experience a certain thought or emotion, for example. It definitely makes us much more focused when you don't believe that you can choose to think about those things. Because there's certain type of music, for example, that can inspire our minds to generate some specific thoughts or emotions. And I think that this is very interesting. And I'll get to that in a much deeper way in future videos. So I hope that in the future, what is going to happen is that we will, and we must, replace the thinker with the mind. Thanks for watching, and see you in another video.